I am Madeleine, 34 years old, and while my husband secretly made plans to divorce me and run back to the woman he left me for, I pretended I knew absolutely nothing. I smiled at his jokes. I cooked his favorite meals. I slept next to him every single night. But before he could empty our joint accounts and take the beautiful life we built together, I quietly moved my money, restructured my assets, and made absolutely sure I would not be left with nothing. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart someone who tried to destroy your life. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the crowded living room. It was my in-laws' 40th wedding anniversary party. My mother-in-law, Barbara, and her husband had rented a massive estate in the Chicago suburbs for the occasion, complete with a string quartet playing softly in the corner, and a small army of catering staff weaving through the guests. I was wearing a sleek emerald green dress, playing the role of the perfect supportive wife to Nathaniel. Nate and I had been married for 4 years. He was 35 years old, a commercial real estate broker, charming, sharp, and always impeccably dressed in custom suits. I loved him, or at least I loved the man I thought he was. I spent the first 2 hours of the party making polite small talk with his extended family, smiling until my cheeks ached. The room was suffocatingly warm, filled with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted prime rib. I noticed Barbara glancing at my empty wine glass. She had been exceptionally cold to me all evening, giving me tight smiles that never reached her eyes. She always made me feel like an outsider, a temporary fixture in her son's life. I excused myself from a tedious conversation with one of Nate's relatives and decided to head to the kitchen to fetch a specific bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon I had brought as a gift. The hallway leading to the kitchen was quiet, a stark contrast to the loud chatter of the main reception area. My heels made no sound on the thick Persian runner rug. I pushed the heavy oak door open just a crack, intending to slip in and grab the bottle. I stopped dead in my tracks. Nate and Barbara were standing near the marble kitchen island. Their voices were hushed, but the kitchen was empty of catering staff, making their words painfully clear. I stood frozen behind the slightly open door. "I saw Cassidy yesterday," Barbara said. The name hit me like a physical blow. Cassidy was Nate's ex-wife. They had divorced 2 years before Nate and I even met. Barbara had never hidden her preference for Cassidy, constantly making passive-aggressive remarks about how much she missed having her around. "She's already picking out new furniture for the living room." Barbara continued, her tone practically vibrating with excitement. "She found a gorgeous beige sectional that will look perfect in the new condo." "Tell me you are finally making progress, Nathaniel. How much longer until you get rid of Madeline?" I stopped breathing. I waited for my husband to defend me. I waited for him to tell his mother to stop being ridiculous, to remind her that he loved me, that I was his wife. "Next month, Mom." Nate replied, his voice calm and entirely devoid of guilt. "I just need a little more time. The divorce papers are already drafted. My lawyer has everything ready to go. But what about the money?" Barbara pressed. "You cannot let her walk away with half of everything you have built. Cassidy is depending on you to provide a proper home." "Do not worry about the money," Nate chuckled. It was a cold, calculated sound that made my blood run icy. "I have been moving cash around for weeks. I am going to drain the joint savings right before I serve her the papers. And the house is the best part. I told her I need to refinance the property to secure capital for a massive commercial real estate deal. I am getting her to sign the refinancing paperwork next Wednesday. Once she signs that, I can pull all the equity out of the house in cash. I will use that cash to close on the luxury condo for Cassidy. Then I am out." Barbara patted his arm affectionately. "Good boy. You always were so smart with money. Cassidy is so excited to finally start a real family with you. Madeline was always too obsessed with her career anyway. She will probably just bury herself in her work once you leave. She will not even see it coming." The betrayal washed over me in crushing waves. My husband of 4 years was not just having an affair with his ex-wife. He was actively plotting to leave me financially ruined. He was going to steal the equity from the home I had painstakingly decorated, drain the savings account I contributed to every single month, and leave me holding the bag while he played house with Cassidy. Any normal person would have burst through those doors. I should have screamed. I should have thrown plates, demanded answers, and caused a massive scene in front of his entire snobby family. The urge to confront them burned in my throat, but I did not shed a single tear. My heart, which had been racing just moments before, slowed to a steady, deliberate rhythm. A strange clinical detachment washed over my brain. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my emerald dress. I adjusted my posture, ensuring my shoulders were pulled back and my spine was perfectly straight. I pasted on a chillingly calm, bright smile. I pushed the heavy oak door fully open and walked into the kitchen. Nate jumped, slightly, guilt flashing across his eyes before he quickly composed himself. Barbara stiffened her hand, dropping from his arm. "There you two are," I said, my voice light and cheerful. "I was just coming to grab that Cabernet we brought. The caterers seem to have misplaced it." I walked right past them, opened the wine cooler, and pulled out the bottle. I grabbed 2 clean glasses from the counter and poured a generous measure of the dark red liquid. I turned back to my mother-in-law, holding out one of the glasses. "Here you go, Barbara," I said, maintaining direct eye contact. "You look like you could use a drink. You must be exhausted from planning such a beautiful party." Barbara took the glass hesitantly. "Thank you, Madeline." Nate stepped forward, wrapping an arm around my waist. The physical contact made my skin crawl, but I leaned into him effortlessly. "Having fun, honey?" he asked. I looked up at him, my smile never faltering. "I am having a wonderful time, Nate. Truly unforgettable." We walked back out to the party together. Nate went to mingle with his cousins, leaving me standing by the grand fireplace. I watched him across the room, laughing and charming the guests. He looked so confident, so entirely sure of himself and his brilliant little plan. Nate thought I was just a stressed, easily manipulated wife. He thought I was too busy balancing my career and our household to pay close attention to the paperwork he shoved in front of me. He assumed that because I loved him and trusted him, I would blindly sign away my financial security without reading the fine print. But Nathaniel had made one catastrophic miscalculation. He had forgotten exactly what I do for a living. I am a financial restructuring consultant. I spend my days dismantling failing corporations, auditing hidden assets, and ripping apart complex financial frauds. When a multi-million-dollar company goes bankrupt, they call me to trace where the money went and legally claw it back. I analyze contracts for hidden loopholes. I structure irrevocable trusts. I know every legal trick to protect capital and expose financial predators. Nate thought he was pulling off a sophisticated real estate scam against a clueless woman. He had no idea he had just declared financial war on an absolute expert. If he wanted to play a game of assets and liabilities, I was going to show him how the professionals played. He wanted to leave me with nothing so he could fund his new life with his ex-wife. I decided right then and there that by the time I was finished with him, he would not even have the shirt on his back. I took a slow sip of my wine, watching my soon-to-be ex-husband smile at his mother. Let the games begin. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as I poured my first cup of coffee. Nate walked in dressed in his perfectly tailored navy suit, holding a thick manila folder. He tossed it onto the marble island with practiced nonchalance. "Morning, babe," he said, kissing my cheek. "I need a quick favor before I head to the office. My biggest commercial deal just hit a slight snag with liquid capital. I need to leverage our current property to secure a bridge loan, just a standard refinance. Sign here, here, and here." He handed me a sleek silver pen, tapping the sticky notes marking the signature lines. Any ordinary spouse would have signed, blindly trusting the man they married. I took a sip of my coffee, playing the role of the distracted, supportive wife perfectly. "Of course, honey," I said, my voice light. "Leave them here. I will read through them while I finish my breakfast and leave them on your desk." Nate frowned slightly, a flicker of impatience crossing his handsome features. "It is really urgent, Madeline. The lender needs these by 10 o'clock. "I know," I replied with a reassuring smile. "I just need to grab my reading glasses upstairs. I will sign them the second I come down. Go ahead and start the car." He hesitated, then nodded, grabbing his briefcase. Make it quick, I cannot lose this deal. The second the front door clicked shut, my entire demeanor shifted. I grabbed the manila folder and practically sprinted to my home office. I pulled out my phone and opened a high-resolution scanner app. My eyes darted across the pages, absorbing the financial jargon with absolute clarity. This was not a standard refinance. This was an aggressive cash-out refinance document. Nate was attempting to leverage 80% of our home's current market value. He was effectively trying to extract nearly $400,000 of pure equity in a lump sum cash payment directed to a secondary account under his sole business name. He was draining the lifeblood out of our primary asset, leaving me tethered to a massive bloated mortgage, while he planned to walk away clean. My fingers flew across the screen, photographing every single page, clause, and addendum. I captured the notary sections, the liability waivers, and the fine print detailing the cash disbursements. I emailed the encrypted files directly to a secure hidden server I used for my corporate audits. By the time I heard Nate honk the car horn in the driveway, I was back in the kitchen, casually signing my name on the sticky notes. I walked out to the driveway, handed him the folder through the car window, and smiled brightly. "All done, honey. Good luck with the big deal." He snatched the folder, his eyes gleaming with greedy satisfaction. "You are the best, Madeline. I will make this up to you, I promise." I watched his car disappear down the street. Oh, I knew exactly how he was going to make it up to me. The following Saturday, the crisp autumn air provided the perfect backdrop for a backyard barbecue at Vanessa's house. Vanessa was Nate's older sister, and her husband Jamal was the man currently manning the massive stainless steel grill. Jamal was a 36-year-old African-American man with a sharp mind and an even sharper sense of observation. While the rest of my in-laws reveled in shallow gossip and materialistic bragging, Jamal always stood apart. He worked as a forensic accountant, investigating white-collar crimes and tracking missing funds for high-net-worth clients. We had always shared a quiet mutual respect, often exchanging knowing glances when Barbara would start her toxic narcissistic rants. Barbara was in rare form that afternoon. She sat on the patio furniture, loudly praising Nate's recent business acumen while completely ignoring my presence. Nate sat across the yard, glued to his phone, a dopey grin plastered on his face. He was obviously texting Cassidy. I maintained my composed facade, sipping a sparkling water and making polite conversation with distant relatives. Jamal flipped a row of burgers, wiped his hands on a towel, and caught my eye. He gave a subtle tilt of his head toward the side gate leading to the basement stairs. Madeline, Jamal called out smoothly, "Do me a favor and help me grab the extra cooler from the basement." "My hands are full." "Sure thing, Jamal," I replied, setting my glass down. I followed his broad shoulders down the concrete steps into the cool, dimly lit basement. The heavy door clicked shut behind us, muting the sounds of the barbecue above. The moment we were alone, Jamal's relaxed host persona vanished. His expression turned dead serious. He reached into the pocket of his cargo shorts and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive. He held it out to me. "Take this," he said, his voice low and urgent. "And do not let Nate see it." I took the drive, my fingers brushing his. "What is this, Jamal?" He crossed his arms over his chest, his jaw clenching. "A few weeks ago, Nate came to me asking for some off-the-books accounting advice. He wanted me to look over his brokerage firm's ledgers because he claimed there was a discrepancy with a junior partner. But Nate is sloppy. He gave me access to the master server. I spent 3 days digging through the metadata. I know what he is doing, Madeline. I know about Cassidy." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face entirely impassive. "You know," Jamal let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I know that my mother-in-law is a toxic enabler who has been encouraging her golden boy to ruin his marriage. I overheard Barbara and Vanessa talking about Cassidy last month. It made me sick. Vanessa actually thinks Nate is justified because you work too much. But I respect you, Madeline. You are the only person in this family who actually earned what they have. I am not going to let that arrogant fool destroy you." I gripped the flash drive tightly, feeling a surge of genuine gratitude. In a family full of vipers, I had just found a lethal ally. What exactly did you find on the server, Jamal? Jamal stepped closer, ensuring his voice remained a harsh whisper. He has been running a sophisticated shell game for the past 6 months. Nate siphoned exactly $250,000 of your joint marital funds out of the primary savings accounts. He disguised the transfers as corporate losses and business expenses to his brokerage firm. From there, he funneled the cash through 3 different dummy LLCs to wash the trail. I felt my professional instincts flare up, calculating the financial damage instantly. Where did the money end up? He dumped it all into an offshore cryptocurrency wallet. Jamal explained, his eyes locking onto mine. He converted the cash into untraceable digital assets. Then he used those crypto assets to anonymously purchase a luxury condo downtown under Cassidy's name. He is buying her a house with your money, but because he was arrogant, he left the digital receipts on his secondary hard drive. Everything is on that flash drive. The transaction hashes the bank statements, the fake invoices, all of it. A cold, dangerous thrill raced through my veins. As a financial restructuring expert, I knew exactly what Jamal had just handed me. In the eyes of United States, divorce law transferring joint funds to a paramour or hiding assets in anticipation of a divorce is a severe legal violation. It is explicitly classified as the dissipation of marital assets. When a spouse commits dissipation, the courts do not look kindly upon it. The defrauded spouse is legally entitled to claw back 100% of the squandered funds during the asset division process. Nate thought he was being a mastermind by using cryptocurrency, believing the blockchain would hide his tracks. He forgot that the blockchain is a public ledger, and with a forensic accountant like Jamal extracting the root data, Nate's digital fingerprints were permanently stained with guilt. He is trying to drain the house equity next, I told Jamal quietly. He had me sign cash-out refinance papers yesterday morning. He plans to take the cash and run. Jamal's eyes widened slightly before a predatory smile crept onto his face. I should have known you were already 10 steps ahead of him. You are not going to just let him take it, are you? I am going to let him dig his own grave, I replied, slipping the flash drive into my pocket. He wants to play with hidden assets and fraudulent documents. I'm going to make sure that when he pulls the trigger on this divorce, he shoots himself in the foot. Jamal chuckled, shaking his head in admiration. If you need an expert witness to verify those crypto trails in court, you know who to call. I would gladly testify against him. Thank you, Jamal, truly. Do not thank me yet, he said, turning back toward the stairs. Just make sure you burn him to the ground. We walked back up to the sunlit patio as if we had merely been searching for ice. I handed Jamal the cooler, smiling pleasantly at Barbara as she glared in my direction. I felt the hard plastic of the flash drive pressing against my thigh. Nate was sitting right where I left him, blindly typing messages to the woman he thought he was going to build a new life with. He had no idea that the noose was already tightening around his neck. 2 days after the backyard barbecue, my mother-in-law called to announce she was hosting an early birthday dinner for Nate. She did not ask if I was available. She simply stated that she would be arriving at my house on Friday evening with groceries and expected the dining room to be ready. I agreed effortlessly, playing the role of the gracious, accommodating wife. If Barbara wanted to play games in my territory, I was more than happy to set the board. Friday evening arrived with a crisp chill in the air. I had just finished setting the dining table with my finest bone china when the front door chimed. I smoothed my dress, pasted on a warm smile, and walked to the foyer. Nate opened the door, and there stood Barbara, clutching a bakery box. But she was not alone. Standing right behind her, wearing a designer trench coat and a smug, predatory grin, was Cassidy. My husband froze, his hand actually slipping off the brass doorknob. He looked terrified for a split second before his mother barreled past him. "Madeline, darling," Barbara announced loudly, completely ignoring my presence as she walked straight into my kitchen. I ran into Cassidy downtown this afternoon and simply insisted she join us. She is practically family anyway, and it has been entirely too long since we caught up. Cassidy stepped into my foyer, not bothering to wipe her boots on the mat. She looked around my house with the calculating eyes of a prospective buyer touring a model home. "Happy early birthday, Nate," she purred, brushing her hand against his shoulder as she walked past him. Nate swallowed hard, looking at me with a pathetic mixture of panic and poorly concealed excitement. Madeline. I had no idea she was coming, he whispered. I smiled brightly, projecting absolute warmth. Do not be silly, Nate. The more the merrier. I will just set another plate. I walked back into the dining room, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. Over the next hour, Cassidy paraded around my house as if she already possessed the deed. She poured herself a glass of my expensive red wine without asking. She opened my kitchen cabinets to inspect my cookware. She even had the audacity to sit at the head of the kitchen island, forcing me to maneuver around her while I plated the appetizers. Barbara spent the entire time directing conversation toward Cassidy, asking pointed questions about her recent divorce and her future plans, making sure to highlight how available and eager she was to settle down again. I served the food with the precise, mechanical grace of a high-end waitress, observing their pathetic little theater. They genuinely thought they were humiliating me in my own home. They thought I was weak. As we finally moved to the living room for drinks, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jamal and Vanessa had arrived shortly after Cassidy, and Jamal immediately caught my eye, his jaw tight with silent fury at the disrespect playing out in front of us. He stood near the fireplace, nursing a bourbon, watching Cassidy like a hawk. Cassidy, emboldened by Barbara's relentless encouragement and the wine flowing through her veins, began to roam the living room. She drifted toward the large bay windows, running her manicured hands over the custom imported velvet drapes I had personally selected during a trip to Milan. She turned her back to the window, framing herself perfectly against the fabric, and looked directly at Nate. "These walls are too dark," Cassidy said, her voice dripping with passive-aggressive sweetness. "I think beige would brighten it up, do not you, Nate? It feels a little suffocating in here right now." Nate shifted uncomfortably on the leather sofa, caught between the wife he planned to rob and the mistress he planned to run away with. He cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "Yeah, maybe. Beige is nice." Barbara chimed in immediately. "Cassidy has such a wonderful eye for interior design, Nathaniel. You should really listen to her." The room fell dead silent. Vanessa looked down at her shoes, too afraid of her mother to speak up. Jamal took a slow sip of his bourbon. His eyes locked on me, waiting for the explosion. Any other woman would have screamed. Any other woman would have pointed to the door and demanded the mistress leave immediately. I did not raise my voice. I took a delicate sip of my sparkling water, smiled pleasantly at Cassidy, and delivered my response with surgical precision. "You are absolutely right," I said, my tone incredibly polite. "Beige is perfect for people lacking depth." The silence that followed was deafening. Jamal suddenly coughed, turning his head to hide a massive, genuine smile. Vanessa gasped softly. Barbara's mouth dropped open in sheer outrage, her face turning a mottled shade of red. Cassidy stood frozen by the curtains, her smug expression shattering into genuine offense. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. Nate stared at me, completely bewildered. He was used to me being compliant, quiet, and agreeable. He had never heard me speak with such calculated venom. I set my glass down on the coffee table, smoothing my skirt. "Now who is ready for birthday cake?" I asked cheerfully. I spent the rest of the evening serving dessert and pouring coffee, completely unbothered. I watched them interact, absorbing every arrogant smirk and every stolen glance between Nate and his ex-wife. Let her measure the windows. Let her plan her beige walls. I knew something they did not. She was measuring curtains for a house she would never own, funded by a man who was about to lose everything. While Nate spent the next 3 weeks busy carrying on his emotional affair and coordinating his exit strategy, I went to war in the shadows. I took brief leaves of absence from my consulting firm, telling Nate I was overwhelmed with a difficult corporate restructuring case. I was not lying. The corporate restructuring case just happened to be my own marriage. I spent my days sitting in the sleek, glass-walled conference rooms of one of the most ruthless wealth management law firms in the city. I sat across from my lead attorney, reviewing every single financial asset tied to my name. As a highly successful consultant, my legitimate personal wealth far exceeded anything Nate was aware of. I had corporate bonuses, offshore consulting retainers, and independent investment portfolios that predated our marriage. I needed to ensure that when the dust settled, Nate could not touch a single dime of my hard-earned money to pay off his impending debts. Under the guidance of my legal team, I legally funneled my liquid assets and personal wealth into a domestic asset protection trust specifically structured as an irrevocable trust. In the complex world of United States asset protection, an irrevocable trust is the ultimate fortress. By transferring my assets into this trust and naming an independent third-party trustee to manage it, I legally surrendered direct ownership of the funds while remaining the primary beneficiary. Because the trust was irrevocable, those assets were permanently removed from my personal legal estate. If Nate tried to come after my money during the divorce discovery phase, his lawyers would hit an impenetrable brick wall. The assets legally belong to the trust, not to me as an individual, making them completely untouchable in a divorce settlement. Furthermore, because I funded the trust entirely with my separate premarital property and independently shielded corporate income, I bypassed our joint accounts completely. This maneuver was entirely legal, leaving no room for Nate to claim fraudulent conveyance. I signed the final pages of the trust documents with a customized fountain pen, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. Every signature was another brick in the fortress I was building around my future. I spent hours analyzing tax codes, double-checking property deeds, and ensuring my financial armor was flawless. I would come home late in the evenings to find Nate sitting on the couch, texting Cassidy, completely oblivious to the financial maneuvering happening right under his nose. He would ask me how my day was, and I would sigh, rubbing my temples, playing the part of the exhausted wife. Just another long day of crunching numbers and protecting assets, I would tell him, kissing his cheek before heading upstairs. He never once suspected that the assets I was protecting were my own, and the predator I was protecting them from was him. He was too busy building his pathetic house of cards to realize I had already changed the locks on the vault. A few evenings later, Nate tossed a thick, perfectly bound stack of tax documents onto the dining table. It was the deadline week for our tax extension, and he was pacing the hardwood floor with a manufactured look of exhaustion. He loosened his silk tie and let out a heavy sigh, playing the part of the overworked provider to absolute perfection. "I need your signature on our joint tax return, Madeline," he said, tapping a manicured finger against the signature line. My accountant just couriered it over. It has been a brutal fiscal year for the commercial market. We took a massive hit on capital gains, so our taxable income is going to look a lot lower than usual. Just sign the back page so I can get this filed by tomorrow morning. He handed me a pen, expecting me to blindly scrawl my name and walk away. He assumed that because I was a busy consultant, I would not waste my precious free time auditing our personal tax schedules. I gave him a sympathetic nod, took the pen, and signed the summary page exactly where he pointed. I handed the binder back to him, watching the tension instantly melt from his shoulders. He grabbed the folder, kissed my forehead, and practically skipped into his home office to text Cassidy. What my arrogant husband did not realize was that I had already accessed digital copies of those exact tax returns directly through our shared cloud drive earlier that afternoon. When I opened the files on my encrypted laptop, the sheer audacity of his financial crimes made my jaw clench. Nate had not just taken a hit on capital gains. He had fabricated massive systemic losses to completely hide the $250,000 he was funneling to his offshore crypto wallets. I scrolled through Schedule C and Schedule D of our federal tax return. Nate had written off phantom consulting fees to shell companies that did not exist. He exaggerated depreciation on commercial properties he no longer even managed. He was intentionally tanking our joint taxable income to launder the money he was using to buy his mistress a luxury condo. It was not just sloppy accounting, it was textbook premeditated tax evasion. By demanding I sign a fraudulent joint return, he was legally tying me to a federal crime. The next morning, I arranged a highly confidential meeting with Jamal. We met at a private, windowless conference room inside my downtown office building. Jamal arrived wearing a sharp charcoal suit carrying a secure briefcase containing the audited metadata he had extracted from Nate's brokerage servers. I slid the printed copies of Nate's fraudulent tax returns across the polished mahogany table. Jamal reviewed the schedules, his eyes narrowing as his forensic accounting instincts took over. He let out a low whistle, shaking his head in absolute disgust. This is reckless, Madeline. He is claiming six-figure operational losses for a subsidiary firm that has not been active in 2 years. He is trying to wash the cryptocurrency transfers by classifying them as bad debt write-offs. If the government audits this, he is looking at federal prison time. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. Then we are going to make absolutely certain the government audits this, Jamal. I am not going down for his financial treason. I opened my briefcase and pulled out 2 highly specific legal documents I had prepared the night before. The first was IRS Form 8857, the request for innocent spouse relief. Under United States tax law, if a spouse can prove they were deliberately deceived regarding hidden income or fabricated deductions on a joint return, they can be entirely absolved of any tax liabilities, penalties, or criminal charges. With Jamal's forensic audit and the flash drive proving Nate's hidden crypto transfers, my innocence was legally bulletproof. But the second document was the real weapon. I slid IRS Form 211 across the table. It was the application for award for original information. Jamal read the header and a slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. You are officially blowing the whistle on him. I am handing him to the federal government on a silver platter, I replied, my voice steady and cold. The IRS whistleblower office pays individuals who report tax fraud anywhere from 15 to 30% of the total funds recovered. Nate thought he was clever by hiding $250,000 and evading the taxes on it. By filing this form, I am turning his federal crime into my future payday. I will secure my legal immunity and get paid a massive bounty by the government using his own stolen money. Jamal took a pen from his suit pocket and began organizing the exhibits we needed to attach to the forms. He meticulously matched the fake invoices from the tax return to the hidden blockchain transactions on the flash drive. He worked with the quiet, lethal efficiency of a man who loved seeing arrogant criminals brought to justice. Within 2 hours, we had compiled an inescapable, deeply documented dossier of Nathaniel's federal tax fraud. I sealed the envelope, marking it for certified delivery to the IRS whistleblower office in Washington. The trap was officially set. With the federal snare waiting to snap shut, I turned my attention to the most critical battlefront of all, the house. Nate was still operating under the delusion that he was going to extract $400,000 of equity from our home through a cash-out refinance. He planned to use that money to finalize the purchase of Cassidy's downtown condo. He had scheduled a mobile notary to come to our house that Friday evening to finalize the loan documents. However, Nate had made a fatal error when we first got married. He had forgotten the exact legal structure of our primary residence. Before we ever walked down the aisle, I had purchased this house entirely with my own money. To protect my privacy, I had placed the deed of the house under an anonymous limited liability company. It was a prenuptial separate property entity that I controlled with absolute authority. Nate's name was never on the deed. He was merely listed as an authorized resident. When Nate initiated the refinance application with the commercial lender, he assumed that because we were married, he had equitable rights to the property. He submitted the application under his commercial brokerage license, aiming to bypass standard residential underwriting. What he did not anticipate was that the commercial lender would mandate a verification of collateral from the LLC. As the sole managing member of the LLC, I intercepted the commercial lender's underwriting request 3 days before the notary appointment. I called the senior loan officer, a man I had done business with during my own corporate restructuring deals. I informed him that the LLC would not be pledging the property deed as collateral for Nathaniel's loan. However, I smoothly suggested an alternative. I instructed the lender to pivot the application to a high-yield, unsecured personal liability loan using Nate's own commercial brokerage shares and future commission structures as the sole collateral. The lender, eager to close a lucrative commercial loan, agreed to draft the revised addendums. They overnighted the updated loan binder directly to my private office. When Friday evening arrived, Nate was practically buzzing with adrenaline. He had booked dinner reservations for us, playing the part of the devoted husband celebrating a successful business deal. The mobile notary arrived right on time, setting a thick stack of legal documents on our kitchen island. Nate stood beside me, practically salivating as the notary flipped to the signature pages. He was so blinded by his greed and his desperate desire to fund his new life with Cassidy that he did not bother to read the bold print at the top of the revised addendums. He did not notice that the words deed of trust had been entirely removed. He did not notice that the collateral section now explicitly listed his personal brokerage license and his individual future earnings. I played my part flawlessly. I smiled, made small talk with the notary, and signed my name only on the spousal acknowledgement waiver, a document that legally confirmed I was aware of the loan but bore absolutely zero financial responsibility for its repayment. Nate grabbed the pen and frantically signed his name on every line the notary pointed to. He initialed the margins. He signed the promissory note. He executed the final pages with a triumphant flourish, handing the clipboard back to the notary with a massive grin. "Thank you," Nate said, shaking the notary's hand. "This capital is going to change everything for my business." I watched the notary pack the documents into her briefcase and walk out the front door. Nate turned to me, wrapping his arms around my waist, pulling me close. "We did it, Madeline. The funds should hit the account by Monday morning. I am going to take you somewhere amazing to celebrate soon." I rested my hands on his chest, looking up into his lying, treacherous eyes. "I am sure you will, Nate. You deserve everything that is coming to you." He kissed me, entirely unaware that he had just signed his own financial death warrant. He believed he had successfully stolen the equity from my home. In reality, the house remained completely untouched, shielded securely behind the impenetrable walls of my LLC. Nate had just taken out a $500,000 personal loan with a staggering commercial interest rate. He was now solely personally liable for a massive debt tied directly to a brokerage business that was about to be investigated by the federal government for tax evasion. He was going to take that borrowed money, buy a condo for his mistress, and walk away thinking he was a genius. He had no idea that I was going to let him build his brand new life right on top of a legal landmine. I had secured my assets, immunized myself from the IRS, and strapped $500,000 of toxic debt directly onto his shoulders. Now all I had to do was wait for him to throw his little divorce party, and I would gladly hand him the detonator. 2 weeks later, the highly anticipated invitation arrived via a smug text message from Nate. He invited our entire immediate circle to a private dining room at one of the most exclusive, ridiculously overpriced steakhouses in the financial district. He claimed it was a special gathering to celebrate a massive promotion at his brokerage firm and the successful closing of his recent commercial capital acquisition. I knew exactly what he was actually celebrating. I wore a perfectly tailored crimson sheath dress, slipped my heavy designer tote bag over my shoulder, and walked into the restaurant looking every bit the proud, affluent, and entirely clueless wife he believed me to be. The private room was dimly lit and undeniably gorgeous, adorned with rich mahogany-paneled walls, tufted leather booths, and crystal glassware that gleamed brightly under the soft ambient lighting. Nate was already seated at the head of the long, polished table, nursing a glass of 20-year-old single malt scotch with the arrogant posture of a king holding court. Barbara sat to his immediate right, practically vibrating with eager anticipation. Next to her, incredibly, was Cassidy. She was wearing a tight, revealing cocktail dress that was entirely inappropriate for a family dinner, and she sipped her vodka martini with the unearned confidence of a woman who believed she had already won the jackpot. Vanessa and Jamal sat across from them. Vanessa looked deeply uncomfortable, her eyes darting nervously between Cassidy and the empty seat reserved for me at Nate's left side. Jamal, however, was the picture of absolute terrifying tranquility. He caught my eye the exact moment I walked in, gave a singular, barely perceptible nod of solidarity, and leaned back in his leather chair. He knew exactly what was resting heavily inside the designer tote bag strapped to my shoulder. I took my seat next to Nate with flawless, calculated grace, I greeted Barbara pleasantly, offered Vanessa a warm smile, and even told Cassidy how much I admired her boldness for attending a private family dinner she had absolutely zero business being at. Cassidy scoffed, rolling her eyes and leaning closer to Nate, but Nate just chuckled, utterly blind to the razor-sharp edge hidden in my voice. He confidently ordered the most expensive tomahawk steaks on the menu, demanded 3 bottles of imported red wine, and commanded the room with the booming, obnoxious voice of a man who firmly believed he was invincible. I ate my dinner with exquisite manners, chewing every bite slowly, letting him enjoy his final hour of delusional grandeur. I watched him boast about his impending real estate conquests, knowing full well he was building castles in the sky with debt he could never repay. As the diligent waitstaff discreetly cleared our main course plates and prepared to bring out the dessert service, Nate signaled the sommelier to pour a round of vintage champagne for the table. He stood up at the head of the room, tapping his heavy silver fork against the rim of his crystal flute. A hush fell over the private dining room. Vanessa shifted nervously, gripping her napkin. Barbara leaned forward eagerly, her eyes gleaming with malicious, uncontained delight. Cassidy adjusted her posture, puffing out her chest and offering Nate a sickeningly sweet, devoted smile. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Nate began, his voice echoing slightly against the dark mahogany walls. "I told you we were here to celebrate a major promotion and a massive financial win for my brokerage. And while that is absolutely true, tonight is actually about something much bigger. It is about closing one outdated chapter and officially starting a brand new authentic one." He reached into the inside breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope. Without a shred of hesitation, without an ounce of human decency or respect for the vows we had taken, he dropped it directly onto my empty dessert plate. It landed with a heavy, insulting thud that seemed to vibrate through the entire table. "Those are divorce papers," Madeline Nate announced, his voice booming loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "I have already signed them." Vanessa gasped out loud, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in shock. Jamal simply crossed his muscular arms over his chest, his face turning to unreadable stone as he watched the performance unfold. Barbara did not even try to hide her cruel reaction. She let out a triumphant, breathy laugh, raising her champagne glass a fraction of an inch in my direction as if offering a toast to my demise. Nate puffed out his chest, completely reveling in the cruelty of his public ambush. "Let us be brutally honest, Madeline. This marriage has been dead for a very long time. You are entirely too obsessed with your work. You are cold, you are distant, and you care far more about rescuing your corporate clients than you do about building a real home for a husband. I am a successful man. I need a woman who actually wants to be a supportive partner. I deserve a real family and a real future." He reached down and grabbed Cassidy by the hand, pulling her up to stand intimately beside him. She clung to his arm, smirking down at me like a victorious predator who had just claimed her prized kill. "Cassidy and I have reconnected." Nate continued, puffing himself up to look like a romantic hero rather than a cheating, manipulative coward. "She actually understands the pressures I face. She supports my ambitions without question. We have decided to build a life together. The house refinance cleared yesterday, so my business is fully funded with fresh capital, and I am finally ready to move on. My lawyer has outlined a very fair, generous settlement in those papers. I strongly suggest you sign them quickly so we can both go our separate ways without making this ugly." He stood there, chest puffed out, holding his mistress by the hand, flanked by his vindictive mother. He had orchestrated this entire expensive dinner purely to humiliate me. He wanted a captive audience. He wanted to watch me break down, cry, scream, and beg for an explanation in front of the exact woman he was replacing me with. He wanted the ultimate ego stroke to validate his twisted narrative. A suffocating, dead silence fell over the private dining room. The faint, muffled sound of jazz music drifting in from the main restaurant outside felt like it belonged to an entirely different universe. Everyone at the table stared at me, holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable emotional explosion. They fully expected tears. They expected screaming. They expected me to throw my glass of water right in his face or lunge across the mahogany table at Cassidy. I did absolutely none of those things. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single pathetic tear for a man who was already financially buried. Instead, my heart rate slowed to a calm, steady rhythm. The analytical corporate liquidator inside my brain took complete control. I reached for my crisp, white linen napkin and elegantly, slowly dabbed the corners of my mouth. I set the napkin down beside my plate, picked up my glass of sparkling water, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The sound of the ice clinking gently against the crystal was the only noise cutting through the heavy, suffocating tension in the room. I set the glass down gently. I looked up, locking my eyes directly with Nate. His arrogant, self-satisfied smile faltered for a fraction of a second, visibly unsettled by my absolute ice-cold composure. He expected a broken wife, but he was staring at a financial executioner. Without breaking eye contact for even a moment, I reached down into the deep compartment of my designer tote bag. My fingers brushed against the smooth, heavy cardstock I had prepared. I pulled out 3 thick, professionally bound legal folders and placed them squarely on the table next to my plate. Then, with the very tips of my fingers, I pinched the edge of his flimsy manila envelope containing the divorce papers. I looked at it with mild, detached amusement, as if he had just handed me a child's messy drawing. I pushed the envelope right back across the polished mahogany table. It glided smoothly, stopping mere inches from his champagne flute. "I think you are going to need those back, Nathaniel," I said, my voice echoing with a calm, terrifying authority that made the temperature in the room plummet. "Because you are going to need a much, much cheaper lawyer to handle what comes next." I picked up my 3 heavily bound folders and placed them deliberately on top of his rejected divorce papers. The thud they made was 10 times heavier, 10 times more lethal than his envelope had been. I rested my forearms on the table, leaning in slightly, and let a sharp, venomous smile spread across my face. Cassidy swallowed hard, her smug smirk vanishing instantly. Barbara shifted in her leather booth, her triumphant glow fading into sudden creeping anxiety. Jamal leaned forward, a deeply satisfied glint in his eye, ready to watch the destruction unfold. Nate stared down at the 3 folders, his brow furrowing in genuine mounting confusion. He was about to find out that while he was busy planning a glamorous divorce party, I had been busy auditing his entire existence. I reached across the table and flipped open the heavy cover of the first folder. The thick, legal-grade paper was prominently stamped with the official seal of the family court. Nate squinted at the text, his arrogant bravado beginning to fracture as his brain struggled to process the complex legal jargon printed on the page. His eyes darted back and forth, searching for a loophole that did not exist. "What exactly is this, Madeline?" he demanded, though his voice had entirely lost its booming theatrical resonance. It sounded thin, reedy, and laced with genuine fear. That I said, pointing a manicured finger directly at the judge's signature at the bottom of the page, is an emergency court-ordered asset freeze. It went into effect at exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon. Your primary checking accounts, your business operating accounts, and most importantly, your offshore cryptocurrency wallets are completely locked down by the federal court system. Nate physically recoiled, knocking his expensive champagne flute against his water glass. The crystal chimed sharply in the quiet room, a harsh sound that made Barbara flinch. "You cannot do that! You do not even know about the crypto!" "I know everything, Nathaniel," I replied smoothly, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "I know that over the past 6 months, you deliberately siphoned exactly $250,000 of our joint marital funds. I know you washed that cash through dummy corporations and dumped it into an untraceable digital wallet to buy Cassidy a luxury condo downtown." Cassidy's manicured hand flew to her collarbone, her jaw dropping open. She turned to Nate, her eyes wide with sudden, unadulterated panic. "Nate, what is she talking about? The condo closing is on Tuesday. We already picked out the paint colors." "There will be no closing on Tuesday, Cassidy," I stated, shifting my cold gaze directly to her. "In the United States, hiding joint funds to purchase assets for an affair partner is legally defined as the dissipation of marital assets. I filed an emergency injunction. A forensic audit proved he stole from our marriage. The judge immediately froze the funds, and during the asset division, I will be legally clawing back 100% of that money. You are not getting a luxury condo. You are not getting a single dime of my money. Cassidy's face drained of all color. The smug, victorious smirk she had worn all evening completely vanished, replaced by a mask of absolute horror. She dropped Nate's hand, as if his skin were scorching hot, physically inching away from him in the leather booth. Barbara leaned forward, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. Nathaniel, tell her this is a lie. Tell her you protected your assets like we discussed. I did. Nate stammered, his forehead glistening with a sudden sheen of cold sweat. He wiped his brow with a trembling hand. Madeline, you are crazy. I just secured $500,000 in capital yesterday. The refinance cleared. I have the cash. The bank wired it this morning. I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that made Vanessa shrink back into her leather booth. I flipped open the second folder, the crisp sound of the turning page echoing in the dead silent room. Ah yes, the cash-out refinance, I said, tracing the edge of the printed loan agreement with absolute precision. You were so eager to get your hands on that money, so desperate to impress your mistress, that you did not even bother to read the addendums you signed yesterday evening. I read them, Nate snapped, though sheer panic was rapidly overtaking his manufactured anger. His chest heaved as he struggled to control his breathing. I pulled the equity out of our house. The broker assured me it was a done deal. You tried to pull the equity out of my house, I corrected sharply, my voice dropping an octave to deliver the killing blow. You forgot one crucial detail about our primary residence. I bought that house with my own money before we ever got married. The deed is held by a limited liability company, a prenuptial separate property entity that I solely control. Your name was never on the deed. Nate's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at the loan documents in the folder, his eyes darting frantically across the highlighted sections I had meticulously prepared for him. When the commercial lender requested the deed as collateral, I explained, maintaining my calm educational tone. I intercepted the underwriting request. I informed the bank that my LLC would not be pledging the property. Instead, I had them restructure the application. You did not sign a mortgage refinance yesterday, Nathaniel. You signed an unsecured personal liability loan. You put up your commercial brokerage license and your future commission structures as the sole collateral for $500,000. Barbara gasped loudly, clutching her chest, as if she might faint right there in the steakhouse. What does that mean? She demanded, looking frantically between me and her son. Nathaniel, what did you sign? It means, I said, leaning in so Nate could hear every single syllable clearly, that the house remains entirely mine, completely unencumbered. And you, Nate, just took out a $500,000 personal loan at a staggering commercial interest rate. That massive bloated debt is tied strictly to you and your business. The bank owns you. I turned my attention back to Cassidy, who was now staring at Nate with naked, undisguised disgust. She recognized a sinking ship when she saw one, and the rat was preparing to flee. There is no luxury condo, I told her, my voice dripping with faux sympathy. He does not have a house to share with you. He is practically homeless, and he is sitting on $500,000 of toxic debt that he cannot possibly repay. Cassidy pushed her chair back from the table, the wooden legs screeching loudly against the floor. Nate, tell me she is lying, she demanded, her voice turning shrill and hysterical. Tell me you have the money for the closing. You promised me that condo. Nate was hyperventilating. He clawed at the collar of his custom suit, his eyes darting around the private dining room as if looking for an emergency exit. I can fix this, he wheezed, his hands shaking as he grabbed the edge of the table. I can just cancel the loan. I will restructure the business. I just need a few days. You will not have a business to restructure, I interjected smoothly, flipping open the third and final folder. I pushed the heavy document across the table. It was printed on official government letterhead, bearing a seal that struck terror into the hearts of even the wealthiest men. Nate looked down at it, and whatever color was left in his face completely drained away, leaving him looking like a corpse. That is an official notice of an impending federal audit from the Internal Revenue Service, I announced, letting the acronym hang heavily in the air, along with a formal notification of a bank fraud investigation from the federal authorities, the IRS. Barbara shrieked, her hands trembling violently as she reached out to grab her son's arm. Nathaniel, what did you do? You told me your accountant handled everything. He committed textbook tax evasion. Jamal finally spoke up. His deep, resonant voice cut through the panic in the room like a thunderclap. Jamal leaned forward, resting his powerful forearms on the mahogany table, looking at his brother-in-law with absolute, unadulterated disgust. Nate came to me asking for off-the-books accounting advice, Jamal explained to the horrified table. He gave me access to his master server. I spent days extracting the metadata. He fabricated massive capital losses and wrote off phantom consulting fees to hide the money he was funneling to his mistress. He tried to force Madeline to sign a fraudulent joint tax return to make her an accomplice to his federal crimes. Vanessa looked at her husband, then at her brother, tears of profound shame welling in her eyes. You tried to frame Madeline for tax fraud, she asked, her voice breaking with betrayal. How could you be so evil, Nate? I filed IRS Form 211 yesterday morning, I stated, drawing the attention back to me. I turned you in for tax evasion, Nate. I established innocent spouse relief for myself, meaning I am legally immune from your crimes. And because I am the official whistleblower who handed the federal government your hidden crypto ledgers and fake invoices, I will be receiving up to 30% of the recovered funds as a cash reward. Nate was physically shaking now. His arrogant facade had been entirely obliterated, replaced by the pathetic, trembling reality of a man who realized his life was completely over. He looked at the divorce papers he had so smugly thrown at me just minutes ago, realizing they were not a weapon, but a signed confession of his own total ruin. You cannot do this to me, Nate begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. Tears actually began to well in his eyes. Madeline, please. We can work this out. We are still married. I will drop the divorce. We can fix the tax filings. I do not negotiate with financial predators, I said coldly, feeling nothing but absolute triumph. I unclasped my designer tote bag and retrieved a neat stack of $100 bills. I tossed the cash casually onto the center of the mahogany table, right on top of his rejected divorce envelope. I stood up from the leather booth, smoothing the skirt of my crimson dress. I looked down at the pathetic assembly of people who had tried to humiliate me. Cassidy was already grabbing her purse, her eyes calculating her immediate escape. Barbara was clutching her napkin, weeping silently into the fabric as the reality of her golden boy's destruction set in. Jamal gave me a respectful, deeply satisfied nod. I looked Nate dead in the eyes one last time. The house is mine. The firm is mine. The $1.5 million debt with the IRS and the bank is yours. Enjoy your new life together. I walked out of that steakhouse into the cool night air and never looked back. The fallout was as swift as it was absolute. Within 48 hours, the federal investigation into Nathaniel became public record. The State Real Estate Commission does not take kindly to members indicted for bank fraud and tax evasion. They stripped Nate of his commercial brokerage license before the end of the week. His entire career, built on a foundation of arrogance and fraudulent paperwork, was permanently destroyed. Without his license, his income evaporated instantly, leaving him entirely exposed to the crushing $500,000 personal loan he had so eagerly signed. Cassidy did exactly what parasites do when the host runs dry. She did not even wait for the waiter to clear our plates that night. She grabbed her designer clutch, walked out of the private dining room, and blocked his number before she even reached the valet stand. She vanished from his life the moment she realized the luxury condo was a mirage and her wealthy prize was actually a broke, desperate man facing federal prison. Nate tried to reach out to her, begging for emotional support, but she was already hunting for her next wealthy target. Barbara, who had cheered for my downfall and actively encouraged her son to steal my future, was forced to swallow the bitterest pill of all. With Nate facing an army of federal prosecutors and an insurmountable mountain of debt, He needed high-powered criminal defense attorneys just to avoid a maximum prison sentence. Barbara had to liquidate her entire pristine retirement portfolio. She sold her investments, emptied her savings, and mortgaged her own home just to keep her golden boy from sitting in a federal holding cell. Her lavish lifestyle, her expensive luncheons, and her arrogant bragging were completely wiped out. She traded her comfortable retirement for staggering legal fees and the absolute disgrace of a ruined family name. While they drowned in the consequences of their own greed, my life underwent a spectacular rebirth. The divorce was finalized rapidly. Nate had absolutely no leverage, no money, and no legal standing to contest anything I put in front of him. He signed away his rights to everything just to avoid further civil litigation from my legal team. A few months later, the government concluded its investigation. The IRS officially seized all of Nate's hidden cryptocurrency assets and levied massive penalties against him. True to federal law, my whistleblower claim was fully approved. I received a massive tax-free payout from the government funded entirely by the money my ex-husband tried to hide from me. My consulting firm experienced explosive growth. In the elite financial circles of the city, rumors quietly circulated about the woman who had surgically dismantled a hostile financial takeover within her own marriage. Corporate clients flocked to my agency demanding my expertise to protect their empires. I needed a brilliant, trustworthy financial mind to help manage the rapid expansion. I formally offered Jamal the position of Chief Financial Officer at my firm. He happily resigned from his toxic corporate job, and together we built an absolute powerhouse of a financial agency. He and Vanessa completely cut ties with Nate and Barbara, choosing peace and integrity over toxic family loyalty. Now I am standing on the expansive glass balcony of my brand new downtown penthouse, looking out over the glittering city skyline with a fresh espresso in my hand. I built this life with my own intellect, my own resilience, and my own relentless drive. They assume a woman's silence means submission. They forget that in the financial world, silence just means we are auditing the books. Have you ever discovered someone trying to deceive you and decided to play them at their own game? How did you turn the tables on their betrayal? Share your story in the comments below. The power of silent preparation. The story of Madeline is a powerful reminder that true strength often lies in calm preparation rather than loud confrontation. When faced with ultimate betrayal, she didn't let panic dictate her actions. Instead, she used her knowledge and composure to firmly protect her future. The greatest lesson here is that emotional resilience and financial literacy are your absolute best shields against toxic individuals. You never have to scream to be heard, and you certainly don't have to play the victim when someone underestimates your intelligence. Take back control of your narrative. How do you protect your own boundaries? Share your experiences and comment below.